Alright, what's happening, y'all? It's your boy Rico from Street Scores. I'm starting a new series where after every preseason, after every regular season, I'm speaking it into existence, every postseason game, we're going to look at all of the advanced statistics that I could find and a lot of the pro football focused grades as well. And we're going to look at not even just offense and defense. And this video is strictly just offense. Defense and special teams will be the next video. And again, we're going to probably do this every week. But we're also going to look at for offensive linemen, pass block, run block. For cornerbacks, when we get to defense tomorrow, not only are we going to look at their coverage grades, their run stopping grades, and all of that type of stuff, but also their specific coverages against specific receivers. How well did receivers do against those specific corners and all that type of stuff. And then, of course, running backs, yards per carry after contact, and all kinds of stuff like that. So these are going to be some really detailed. Again, some of it is going to be advanced statistics, which is factual. Some of it's going to be pro football focused grades, and I'm just going to acknowledge it as pro football focused grades. We're going to take it with a grain of salt. We're not just going to assume that the guy that has the highest grade was the best player on our team that day. But it does give you a somewhat of an idea of how good players played. There's no way it's just a huge difference in the scores from Pro Football Focus and what was actually done on the field. There may a couple of times be some discrepancies, but for the most part, it's somewhere usually in the ballpark. Again, today we're only doing offense. Tomorrow I'm gonna try to have the defense and special teams one out for y'all. And again, we're gonna try to do this every week. But before we dive into all of that, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell next to the subscription button so you get notification immediately. And every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one, make sure you pull up every Friday for the broadcast podcast where we talk about everything funny that's going on in the world, sports, music, anime, gaming, whatever. And then make sure you pull up every Sunday for the call-in show where y'all call in, you voice whatever opinions you have about the Washington Commanders with the previous preseason game, what happened throughout the previous week in training camp, all of that type of stuff. So make sure you pull up, and every Sunday at 6 p.m. call in. And without further ado, let's get it. And you can already see some of the grades, so you can look at these while I give y'all a lot of the advanced statistics. Right now, these are just the overall offense grades, and they're in order of official offensive ranking overall. But again, I mean, it's different players. So running backs, offensive linemen, wide receivers, quarterbacks, they're all rated on different things. Again, we're going to go by each important position grouping as far as quarterbacking, passing, running, and receiving, and offensive line. Those are going to be the different categories. So you're going to see guys in multiple of those categories. Like you're going to see Sam Howell in the running back area as well because he ran the ball quite a bit. You're going to see tight ends in both offensive line and wide receiver, things like that. But before we get to all of that, again, it's on the screen for you to look at while I'm breaking this down. I want to talk about some advanced statistics. First of all, Carson Wentz in his debut went 10 of 13 for 74 yards and an 89.9 passer rating. Not bad. And per True Media, in his preseason opener, 46.2% of his targets went to tight ends. 90.5% of his plays were from 11 personnel, one tight end, one running back, just a bunch of receivers. And then on average, he had 2.38 seconds to throw. And last year was 2.67. But we already knew coming into the Scott Turner offense that the ball was going to get out of Carson Wentz's hands quicker. I mean, we literally led the league in seconds to throw last year with the least on average. He also had a 76.9 completion percentage, and he had a 15.4 pressure rate, which isn't bad. And I appreciate the fact that he stood in the pocket as tall as he did the whole time. Also, I thought it was really interesting that Ron Rivera said that he would play 15 to 20 snaps. That's what the starters would do. But like I said, if they have a really good drive going, you're not just going to be like, that's it. We said 20 was the max. He ended up playing 21 snaps. And then Sam Howell wise, a lot of people feel like he was the second best rookie quarterback of the entire weekend. Some people felt like he was the best. It was between him and Kenny Pickett. He was 8 for 15, 148 total yards, 4 rushing touchdowns, and an 82.4 passer rating. Also, really interesting, Sam Howell is the first rookie quarterback to have 100 plus passing yards and 2 rushing plus touchdowns in a preseason game since Dak Prescott did it in 2016. He's also the first rookie quarterback to have 150 plus total yards and 2 plus rushing touchdowns with fewer than 20 pass attempts in a preseason game since Dak Prescott. So is it safe to say Sam Howell is as good as Dak Prescott? Not yet, but you definitely can't say that he won't be. Not yet on both options. Also, before we dive into this, I just want to remind people that we've turned a first round pick, 11th overall, and a 6th round pick into Jahan Dotson in the first round, Brian Robinson in the 3rd round, Sam Howell in the 5th round, and Cole Turner in the 5th round as well. I definitely think we won-upped on that one for sure. I mean, granted, Chris Olave may end up being a better receiver than I think he's going to be. But either way, all of those guys that we got out of that's going to go down in history as one of our best trade backs at the very least. But we're done with the advanced statistics for now. Well, now let's look at the offense. And I apologize for being in the way for some of the guys at the very back. Here it is if you wanted to take a look at some of those names real quick and then compare. You can pause the video if you want to, if you want it to last longer, but let's get right back to it. All right, so Pro Football Focus feels like our best players against the Panthers were Willie Bevers, the right tackle, Deion Calhoun, left guard, who we ended up releasing yesterday as in Tuesday, sadly. Then Samuel Cosme at right tackle, I'm not surprised. Charles Leno at left tackle, Andrew Norwell left guard, Jared Patterson at running back, Keith Ishmael at center is an interesting surprise. Carson Wentz at quarterback, Kyrick McGowan at receiver and returner, Wes Schweitzer at guard, not surprised. Aaron Montero, pretty surprised. Alex Erickson, pretty surprised. Rashad Hill, Brian Robinson, and J.D. McKissick 15th. And then my boy Armani Rogers 16th. You know, I had to go right there. Then you have Jonathan Williams, Dax Milne, Marcus Michelle, and then you get to Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin is 20th. And then out of the notable players, you have Jahan Dotson 31st and Sam Howell all the way 32nd with a 49.1 overall grade. We're going to get to that when we get the quarterback, though. And of course, Antonio Gibson, 40 overall grade, the worst on the team with that fumble. But they felt like he had a really good pass blocking grade. They felt like he pass blocked pretty well. I'm very surprised by that. I'm going to have to go back and look at the film to see, because that's been one of his biggest weaknesses. Usually everything else is going to be high and his pass blocking is going to be low. That's usually how it's been so far in his NFL career, because he hasn't been a good pass blocker. Before his pass blocking to be green, that's promising. Again, it's a lot of stuff where I'm going to have to go back and look at the tape to see why Pro Football Focus feels this way about certain things. But hey, that's really encouraging. And then let's look at the passing grades. They had Carson Wentz is our best quarterback, Taylor Heinicke is our 2nd best, and Sam Howell is our 3rd. They felt like Carson Wentz had a 69.6 passing grade, Taylor Heinicke had a 51.4, and Sam Howell had a 43.7. Now, I do feel like Sam Howell had some very turnover-worthy plays. You can consider 2 of them turnover-worthy. And, oh, that's interesting. That's actually what they have right here. TWP right here, 2 turnover-worthy plays with a 9.1 turnover-worthy percentage. So that's probably what brought his grade down mightily. But, I mean, I think that's really interesting that they deduct Sam Howell so many points for having 2 turnover-worthy plays when Taylor Heinicke had 1 actual turnover play. Not turnover-worthy, turnover. But then again, you could kind of say that it was because of the pressure on him and it made him float the ball. He ended up getting hit and he wasn't actually able to throw the ball like he normally would have. So I don't know. Either way, though, it still looked like to me Sam Howell was the better quarterback, but I can still see why Taylor Heinicke is your 2nd string quarterback. It was a lot to love from Sam Howell, and there's a lot of potential, and I'm very excited about his future. But at the end of the day, there were a lot of reads that he missed and a lot of things he left on the field where he could have had an even more impressive debut. And they may also be factoring the fact that Taylor Heinicke was going against the 2s and Sam Howell was going against the 3s and 4s. But then again, he was playing with the 3s and 4s. But again, I don't want to dive too much into what these grades mean and how much I agree or disagree, but I just wanted to give y'all context for that right there. But for the most part, with these Pro Football Focus grade videos, I'm just going to be providing y'all the grades and just showing y'all which ones matter the most. Again, whether I agree or disagree, the views of Pro Football Focus do not necessarily guarantee that they align with the views of Rico and Street Scores. Let me get that disclaimer now. So I don't necessarily exactly agree with this, but I'm just trying to give y'all the reasoning why this is why Pro Football Focus felt this way. But again, they felt like Carson Wentz had a 69.6 passer grade, Taylor Heinicke had a 51.4, and Sam Howell had a 43.7. But Sam Howell had the highest run grade out of the quarterbacks. Carson Wentz doesn't even have a run grade at all because he didn't run the ball. But Sam Howell's a 71.6, while Taylor Heinicke has a 66.4. And then fumble grade wise, I guess being at risk of fumbling, Sam Howell had the highest grade there, even though that's a weird grade for quarterbacks because neither of them fumbled. But I guess the difference is in between the grades is everybody at risk of fumbling. It's also really interesting that Carson Wentz also had the highest yards per attempt with 8.9. Carson Wentz had 5.7 and Taylor Heinicke had 2.3. And Sam Howell had the higher completion percentage between him and Taylor Heinicke. Of course, he had more yards because he played longer. But I mean, even percentage-wise in yards per attempt, take out how long you were in the game. And even in adjusted completion percentage, Sam Howell was higher in that than Taylor Heinicke. So that's really interesting. And none of them had any drop passes, which is interesting. That's good to hear. And Sam Howell got sacked twice while nobody else was able to get sacked. But that was the offensive line letting them down more than anything else. Now let's look at the rushing grades. Again, this is going to include Sam Howell because he ran the ball a little bit. Really well, too. And Taylor Heinicke. And out of all of the guys that ran the ball, the highest running grades went to Jared Patterson, number 1, Sam Howell, number 2, Reggie Bonnafon, 3, Taylor Heinicke, number 4, Jonathan Williams, 5, Kyrick McGowan, 6, and then you get to Brian Robinson. Again, we already know Antonio Gibson, but I'm really surprised that Brian Robinson's this far down. I don't know about that one. Now, overall grade, Brian Robinson's 3rd, and that's because of his lack of fumbling, I guess, bringing that up. And then he didn't have any run block grade to bring him down like a lot of the other guys did to bring his overall grade down. But running wise, they felt like Sam Howell was our second best running back on Saturday. And Reggie Bonnafon was 3rd, Taylor Heinicke's 4th, Jonathan Williams 5th, and again, Jared Patterson number 1. But when it comes to yards after contact per attempt, Brian Robinson and Sam Howell were tied for 1st overall. So I don't exactly know what else you ask for Brian Robinson because I already did the film session. If you haven't checked it out, go check it out. I did a full film breakdown of his 6 carries against the Panthers, and I felt like he displayed good vision and good patience. And then if you're also tied for the lead in yards after contact per attempt with Sam Howell, what else can you do for his running grade to be higher? Like, I just don't know exactly what they want out of him. And then oddly enough, receiving wise, including tight ends, wide receivers, and running backs, Jared Patterson had the highest receiving grade. And I did feel like he was a pretty good receiver out there, but Pro Football Focus grades are weird because Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson were open plenty of times. They just weren't getting the ball every time. And Terry McLaurin forced 2 penalties. Well, 2 should have been penalties because that one underthrow by Carson Wentz should have been a pass interference because Terry McLaurin was getting hit before he could even make a play on the ball. But those guys were out there routing people up open quite a bit, and somehow Brian Robinson is the higher receiving grade. So again, I'm not going to dive too much into whether I agree or disagree with certain things. I'm just here to present y'all with the data. And so Brian Robinson was our number 1 receiver, JD McKissick was 2, Alex Erickson was 3, Kyrick McGowan 4, Curtis Samuel 5th, which is encouraging, Antonio Gibson 6th, my boy Armani Rogers, yes sir, he's 7, Dax Milne 8, and it goes all the way down to where Terry McLaurin's 10th. And I guess since Jahan Dotson wasn't thrown towards and never had a catch, that he's not even eligible for a grade. And then of course Kelvin Harmon with the bobble situation, he's in last place. De'Ami Brown 13th, Curtis Hodges 14th. I love the fact that my boy Armani Rogers is up there though. My boy is up there. And out of all of the receivers and tight ends and running backs, Antonio Gibson had your highest pass block grade with JD McKissick right behind him, Curtis Hodges in 3rd, Reggie Bonnafon 4th, and Armani Rogers tied with Reggie Bonnafon for 4th. And I love the fact that Armani Rogers' pass block grade is a 72.4. That's way better than I thought it would have been coming into this game. And I'm very encouraged by that because it shows that he won't just simply be like a Vernon Davis, Jordan Reed level blocker to where it's just terrible every game. He's serviceable. He could potentially be up there with like a Logan Thomas as far as just as long as you're getting away long enough and you're relatively physical, we're good. You're a dual threat tight end at that point. And we already know what he did receiving wise. I mean, again, receiving wise, 7th on the team. And as far as hands go and not dropping the ball, Armani Rogers was tied for 1st with Alex Erickson and Curtis Hodges, which I think is really interesting. In overall offensive grades, Armani Rogers actually moves up a spot to 6th. And it's kind of skewed for reception percentage because running backs are always going to have a higher percentage because all you got to do is catch the ball out of the backfield. You're supposed to do that. But out of the guys that weren't just catching the ball out of the backfield, Armani Rogers was 1st in reception percentage with 75. So that makes me really happy. But I mean, the data is such a small sample size that like Terry McLaurin being 1 out of 2 puts him at 50%, which looks terrible. So it is what it is. But the things I really take away from these is, again, the non-grades. And so, like, Alex Erickson had the highest percentage in the slot. 75% of the time he was on the field, he was in the slot. Curtis Hodges right behind him, 71. Curtis Samuel third, Dax Milne 4. So it kind of shows you who's, like, competing against each other for certain positions. I thought that was really interesting. And then out wide-wise, you had Kyrick McGowan, Marcus Michelle, Terry McLaurin, Kelvin Harmon, De'Ami Brown. Terry McLaurin was out wide 92.3% of the time he was out there. He was not playing with y'all. He was only in the slot 1 snap. And then this, again, just shows you who's competing with each other. Kyrick McGowan is more of an outside receiver, but he's also a returner as well. We're going to take a look at that when we get to the special teams, which will be tomorrow along with the defense. Kelvin Harmon outside, Marcus Michelle outside, De'Ami Brown outside. I mean, it's kind of 50-50. He can be outside and in the slot. But again, this kind of just shows you who's competing. Marcus Michelle, Kelvin Harmon, and Kyrick McGowan for those last couple of slots in the receiver group. Along with Cam Sims, for real. I don't know why Cam Sims wasn't out there that much, but I'm assuming he's a roster lock, and that's why we didn't really care to throw him out there that much, because he also contributes a lot in special teams. But this just shows you who's the outside receivers and who's the slot receivers, all competing for the same last couple of spots. Again, of course, outside of the roster locks of Curtis Samuel, Jahan Dotson, Terry McLaurin, and De'Ami Brown. And I wish Jahan Dotson was able to get the ball so we could see how much he was in the slot and out wide, because I'm pretty sure it was a nice mix of both, probably primarily with him in the slot more than anything else. But again, since he wasn't able to catch a pass and technically be targeted, he's not on this list for receivers, which kind of sucks. I wish they would still included that at least. Even if they couldn't give him a grade, we could have seen his slot and wide out position percentages. And before we go, also, nobody had drops, which is good to hear, good to know. And I guess they technically credited Kyrick McGowan with an interception, but there was like literally no way he could have done anything about it. Taylor Heineke just launched it above his head, but again, you could technically say that it was the offensive line's fault because he was getting hit while he was throwing it, and they clearly didn't let that affect his grade because he's still one of the highest grades out of the entire receiving group, including tight ends and running backs. And then pass blocking wise, this is where it gets really interesting. Overall, again, like we talked about earlier, in the overall grades, these are some of our highest grades out of the entire team on offense. You have Willie Beavers number 1, Deion Calhoun number 2, Samuel Cosmi 3, then Charles Leno, then Andrew Norwell, Jared Patterson, Keith Ishmael, and even Carson Wentz as a pass blocker on a play. That's, I don't know what's going on. As a run blocker on one play, that's interesting. I'm gonna have to go back and look at the film and see how he did it, because apparently it wasn't terrible. Even though I don't want him to continue doing that often. I don't know, but Wes Schweitzer, Alex Erickson, all of these guys. Armani Rogers 15th. I'm really happy about that. Y'all know that's my guy, and the fact that he has a higher, at the very least, pass blocking grade than a lot of the guys below him, and running block grade over quite a bit of the guys below him overall passing grade, that makes me really happy, again, because I feel like that would be the only reason he doesn't make the team, because receiving wise, we saw what he could do against the Panthers. We saw him separate 1v1 against a starting NFL corner in Xavier Woods as a rookie undrafted free agent that just started playing the tight end position for the first time ever just a couple of months ago in the East-West Shrine Bowl. He was a quarterback all throughout college. Tight end is new to him, and the fact that he's already out here separating against Xavier Woods and making catches, the potential is limitless. But that's enough of Armani Rogers for now. We are looking at the blocking grades, which is mostly an offensive line situation, but again, there's going to be some running backs, some tight ends, and even some receivers here. And I mean, Carson Wentz apparently blocked at least once and received a 60 run blocking grade for it, which isn't abysmal, especially for a quarterback. But I think it's really interesting that your 3 best offensive linemen yesterday, according to Pro Football Focus, are Willie Beavers, again, Deion Calhoun, who got cut on Tuesday, and Samuel Cosmi. But I'm not surprised about the specific areas that they were great in. If we're looking at run blocking, Willie Beavers was number 1, Samuel Cosmi was number 2, and you expect that. And again, remember, Willie Beavers was going against backups. Samuel Cosmi was going against the starters. Like, while Matt Ioannidis and those guys were out there, and he had a 91.2, which you expect. But I'm really happy with his improved pass blocking grade, because Samuel Cosmi was tied for 3rd in pass blocking grade. But we already know what he's going to do run blocking wise. Keith Ishmael had a better run blocking grade than I expected, but the same problems occur with him, with the pass blocking grade being a really bad grade. Rashad Hill surprised me with his run blocking grade of 80. And then Charles Leno, we know him more for pass blocking than run blocking, and it kind of shows by the slight difference, but he was definitely very impressive in run blocking as well. Deion Calhoun, I mean, just overall really good apparently, but we ended up cutting him, so the Commanders didn't agree with that. And then Andrew Norwell, man, pass blocking 83.5, great to hear, very encouraging with him being the guy that we're bringing in to replace Eric Flowers. And then Wes Schweitzer, with Trey Turner out due to injury, was technically the one replacing Brandon Sheriff, like he's already done in previous games since he's been here. Pass blocking grade really high. His run blocking grade was lower, which I'm surprised about because normally it's the exact opposite, but that's interesting. And then pass blocking wise, they felt like our best guys were Wes Schweitzer, again, really interesting, Andrew Norwell, Deion Calhoun, and Samuel Cosme, much improved, Aaron Montero, Charles Leno, Willie Bevers, and even Antonio Gibson, again at running back like we talked about earlier. Terrible overall grade, but a really good pass blocking grade, which is very encouraging. I'm taking that as a positive. He just has to stop fumbling. If he stops fumbling, if he can pass block that well, that's going to be huge for us. And y'all already know, man, Armani Rogers is one of the guys I'm looking at the most. I'm very excited about this. I mean, it's preseason. When we get to the regular season, we can really dive into these grades and take them seriously because it'll be, first of all, a larger sample size. It's not Samuel Cosme only out there for 22 snaps. He'll be out there the entire game rather than just the first quarter. And that goes for everybody. Tight end, running back, quarterback, receiver, defense, everything. So it's kind of hard for Pro Football Focus to give really accurate / good grades right now because it's small sample sizes. I mean, J.D. McKissick only played 6 offensive snaps. Even the quarterback, Carson Wentz, only played 22 snaps. You know, it's really hard to really judge things. I mean, the backups, Willie Bevers, such a crazy grade, and I'm pretty sure the fact that he played some of the most snaps out of our entire team with 37 of them explains why. They were able to get a larger sample size to be able to give them that higher grade. And then I'm really surprised that Chris Paul, I mean, as far down as he is, because I thought he looked pretty good when blocking yesterday. They felt like his pass blocking was better than his run blocking. And he played 47 snaps, which is a lot. Also, Curtis Hodges apparently played 49 snaps and blocked for 20 of them, which is really interesting. I mean, these snaps are something that you can really take away from this. The fact that Jahan Dotson played in 22 snaps, but really didn't do much. He wasn't really targeted, never was able to catch a pass. And I'm guessing that's why it reflected so poorly on his grade or whatever. But I mean, I just find it really interesting that Jahan Dotson, as good as he looked route running, even though he didn't get the ball, and that's just my opinion. And Sam Howell, as good as he looked, even though he did make a lot of rookie mistakes in that debut that a lot of people aren't noticing because his highlights were so great, I still feel like this is too low for those guys. And again, Chris Paul, I felt like he was better than what his grade says. But again, it's preseason, so the grades are going to be wonky. It's just going to be all over the place. It's going to be a little weird. Willie Bevers, who will probably never play in a regular season game for us, at the very least this season, may not even make the team, is going to be graded higher than Samuel Cosme because it's the preseason. So just hang in there with me. We're still going to do this throughout the preseason, but when we get to the regular season, and again, I'm speaking into existence the postseason, that's when a lot of these things are really going to matter. And we're really going to take a look at all of these statistics, especially like pressures allowed. And that's the last thing we're going to look at before we get out of here. You can't see the names because all of it can't fit on the screen. Otherwise, it's just going to be too small for y'all to see. But when it comes to pressures allowed, Keith Ishmael had 2. Aaron Montero had 1. Rashad Hill had 3. John Toth had 2. Chris Paul also had 2. Alex Akingbulu, who I believe got hurt yesterday in practice, had 1. Other than that, everybody else had 0, which is really good, especially for our starters. And I mean, it's all over the place as far as hits and hurries allowed. And it's preseason right now, so it's so many names. I'll probably dive into that once it's our starters out there for the regular season and things like that. But just sack wise, since it's preseason, again, it's so many guys, we're just going to look at the sacks allowed. You have Chris Paul, who allowed 1, and that's it. So I'm not exactly sure what happened to that second one that happened against Sam Howell, but I guess maybe it was a non-blocking guy that allowed it. I don't know. Pro Football Focus, again, is preseason. They're probably also in preseason form as well, so it's hard to really know what's going on, and maybe they're even making mistakes on their end. So again, I'm coming out with a video tomorrow for the defensive special teams doing the exact same thing. I think the cornerback position is probably the most interesting because it's going to do like a complete breakdown of like who was good against who. Not even just overall grades like we're looking at for these guys, but just imagine if like when we were doing the receiving grades, you saw which corners were covering each receiver at any particular time. The cornerbacks have that. I don't know why Pro Football Focus only did that for the corners, but I think that's a really interesting stat that we can take a look at and grades, because you get to see exactly how good William Jackson was against every receiver that he covered, specifically each grade of those receivers. I think that's really interesting. But yeah, man, that's the end of this video. Please get in the comment section, let me know how you feel about this video. Definitely let me know if you want me to continue this series, especially through the regular season, where these grades will make a lot more sense and we can dive into more things, because because it'll be less names mentioned, because it's going to be the starters out there. The only time backups will come in there will be due to injury or something like that. So because it will be way less names, we can dive into way more statistics. Again, we just looked at pressures and sacks, but for like offensive line, we can also look at hurries and hits allowed specifically for those guys once we get to the regular season and things like that. So definitely let me know in the comment section if you want me to continue this series throughout the preseason and regular season, and again, speaking into existence, the postseason as well. And of course, please leave a like on this video if you liked it, if you learned anything. And also, man, definitely appreciate the support, man. Shouts out to all of my sponsors, especially my Pro Bowl sponsors whose names you see scrolling on the screen right now, man. I really appreciate y'all. Catch y'all later. I'm out.